One of the hardest things to do in markets is to identify strength when everything is weak. In this video, I'm going to break down the ways how I would go about identifying strength in bear markets. Remember, this is according to my research. I do have a free newsletter. Link to that will be in the description. In bear markets, you want to watch what has strength versus others. So there's no point in defining a bull or a bear market, in my opinion, because there's opportunity everywhere. If you're looking at every market, you're looking at every single thing under the sun, there's always going to be opportunity. And, screwing bear market can, keep you in cash, or something else is making a 10x. Solana, for example, from a crypto perspective, recovered from its 2022 lows, where people were still calling it a bear market. So even in October 2023, when Solana was recovering, people were still calling a bear market, and for it to drop, it's a false breakout and everything, right? So there's no point in defining bull or bear markets, in my opinion, to start with. Yes, they're easy, but you want to have defined rules, almost like a checklist of like, okay, cool, I'm going to be less bullish or less bearish. I think that's a better way of doing it. So relative strength means you're comparing the asset, the stock, the coin, the commodity, whatever it is, against its index or a similar peer, for example. So let's say, for example, you're looking at tech, you're looking at the bear market. Okay, you're looking at Nvidia versus the Nasdaq versus the S&P versus the rest of its sector. So you want to look at relative strength. So the obvious play is often wrong. So when something consensus, there's usually less money to be made. In 2022, a lot of people talked about ETH would outperform BTC. ETH BTC said otherwise. So ETH has underperformed Bitcoin since the merge, and the narrative was wrong, the chart was right. So ETH's had a little pop against Bitcoin, but if you look at the ETH BTC chart, it's been pretty much just stepping lower, and that looks like it's going to continue. So watch the ratio, just not the price. So what you can do is you can do a search where you like ETH BTC, so you could do like Nvidia Tesla, you could do Nvidia Meta, and you can find relative strength there. So price going up in a bear market means nothing if everyone else is everything else is going up faster. So you want to be looking for, okay, cool, in what sector, in what asset class is showing relative strength versus others. And a really good way of doing that is like the ETH BTC, for example, and you can do it with every single asset, coin, chart, whatever you're looking at. So here we have the Nasdaq compared against Nvidia and Meta. So we have Nvidia and the Nasdaq versus Meta and the Nasdaq again. So as you can see here, what goes first? We've had a long bear market down there, a long bear market down there. Obviously Meta was bearish slightly before, but what recovered sooner? So as you can see here, before 2023, late November, December, Nvidia actually went bullish versus the Nasdaq. So we've got a 1221 EMA, which I like to use on the weekly, bearish, cross bullish, and they go again. See here we've got Meta and Nvidia and the Nasdaq, bearish, and it crosses later. So this crossing before something in a similar sector, you could argue is, okay, cool, that's going to be bullish. So that's a way of doing it. You look at the ratio, and if it turns bullish against the index versus others, okay, cool, this might be something I want to take more interest in. So that's a really good way of identifying stuff that are showing relative strength coming out of bear markets. Sol versus ETH again, as you can see here, Sol went first, and then ETH kind of didn't even cross at that point. So as you can see here, Sol making some nice weekly moves, and then ETH there again. So as you can see here, we've got a bear market leader relative to something else. You can see Sol recovered first from the lows before ETH did, and then people were under positioned in Solana and they were over positioned in ETH. But if you stuck to your principles, your price action principles, you would have been long Solana there, and you would have maybe you'd get a long ETH here, but maybe you'd have a risk limit and you'd already be long Solana, so you wouldn't be worrying about it. So again, that's another way of doing it. What's going first, you can peg it against the index or against something similar, or you can just chart them against each other. Okay, what is showing relative strength? BTC on the yearly chart. So I wanted to put this in as well. So despite bear market noise, you want to zoom out as well. So here we've got BTC on the yearly chart. Structure's never been broken. So what you would be looking for is Bitcoin to really go below there, go below that 16k level, and then you would argue it's done, right? Yeah, you can have structure breaks, you can have chop in here, but BTC is making higher highs, higher lows, despite a lot of the noise, despite the 50% declines. When you zoom out, it actually looks pretty healthy. So that's another thing to do. You can zoom out and think, okay, cool, is this something I want to take interest in? Zoom out to the yearly chart and see where you're at. If it's not breaking structures, then you can be pretty confident that, okay, cool, this could be something strong going forward. So how to use relative strength in practice? Compare what you are watching against its index or closest peer, as we discussed. Look for ratios turn bullish while the broader market is still bearish. So what is leading out of that bearish trend? What is leading the market? Yeah, you could say, what is what's underpositioned, I think is a good way of putting it. Do not assume the obvious narrative play is the relative strength thing. If everyone's saying, oh, this is going to be the leader, this is going to be that, don't hold them to account. Combine relative strength with yearly structure to build conviction. So you can, filter these things in together. Okay, cool, this is something I'm going to invest in because of these factors. So there's some practical ways how to identify it. So a live example, gold and silver are clearly in bearish phases, and you have copper here showing really strong relative strength. So you could argue copper, whenever whenever commodities are going to run again, copper could be a great one because it showed relative strength. It's not sold off massively like gold and silver. So you could say here, copper, big move, and it's held. So that could be relative strength. There's a couple others as well. There's VVV in crypto. It's quite hard to do it with stocks because they're going, obviously, they're in a lot different, phase than some other things. But copper here, I thought was a really good example of relative strength, you could say, while other commodities are selling off. This is holding up nicely. And there's obviously a narrative around copper as well with AI data centers, EV, energy infrastructure, all those type of things as well. So copper could be one to definitely watch out for. The verdict: screaming bear market is not actionable. Find relative strength is. So when everything is bearish, find a way to confirm a bearish trend, however you want to do it. It could be through earnings, it could be technicals, whatever. Find a way to confirm a bearish trend, and then okay, cool, we're bearish. What's going to be leading out of that? If the whole sector's bearish, what are going to be the leaders? The obvious narrative play is often the lagger. Positioning is really important. If people get overly positioned, and price hasn't gone up, most of the buying's done. If something's under positioned, it could have more of a pop. Yes, you could argue that it could be a lagger, but in the long run, it could be better. But, in the shorter term, this is looking at more of a cycle play. You'd be looking for that more under positioning. And yearly structure, is a great way to have that confirmation. So if you want to get a good understanding of all what I'm talking about here, I do have a free newsletter. Link to that will be in the description. I'll see you in the next one.